Hey, what's happening, everybody? It's your boy Ronimus Prime, back again for another episode of the Secret Sessions podcast with my co-host and cohort in crime, Alan Lynch. Today's guest is Tony Cade. How you doing today, everybody?
How you
Pretty
guys?
good. Pretty good.
I'm living well. Or I'm living as best as I could be in these challenging times. Also thinking that I didn't tee up the thing that I needed to tee up. Here we go. So, for my opening monologue, I want to talk about this. And this was a post that I made. I had another thing I wanted to talk about, but I'm not going to get into it, but I'd rather just get into this one. So, I don't have the full post up, but this is based off of the G.I. Joe Kickstarter. It's another omnibus compendium. It's made like 1.98 million. They asked for 10 grand. They got 1.98 million. And I crunched the numbers, and that's about 19,000%. And so it just got me to thinking, and I'm not comparing indies to a major property like G.I. Joe, but what I am asking is if your book was funded like that, how would that make you feel as a creator on a personal level, emotionally, spiritually, mentally? And then two, what do you think it says about your franchise, about its viability and things of that nature? And then three, how would it help your publishing company? Because all you guys got publishing companies, so how would it help your publishing company? And Alan, I believe you had an answer for that last week, so we'll start with Tony. How would that make you feel?
Oh, it'll make me feel really good. My whole thing is that if I had a property that could bring in that type of money, to me, it means that my character is already well known and has a really nice fan base. Because these are the type of projects that raise that kind of money. Either you got to have somebody really famous working on it, or you need to have a property that has a really gigantic fan base, and those are the ones that bring in millions of dollars. So I'll be thinking, oh man, I really like these pre-sales, because to me, that's the main thing about Kickstarter. It helps get your project out there, but in my head, maybe it's because I'm a retailer, it's all about the pre-sales.
Okay. And and then how would it help your publishing company?
Oh, like I said, it would be great for my publishing company. But like I said, it would already be pre-sales. Because like I said, to me, for my Kickstarter to bring in that type of money, I've already got something that's successful.
Yeah.
So it wouldn't be like, oh man, this just came out of nowhere. To bring in that type of money, you've got to have a property that already has a fan base already established.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, part of what inspired this was that, I've seen a little bit of what's happened with Tyler. So it got me to thinking like getting your book in the hands of the right kingmaker could also help bring in, finances if you didn't already have like a super established base. And so, I just got to thinking along that lines. Now, granted, 1.98 million is a lot, but I mean, even if it brought in 100, 200, 300,000, I know last show, Alan said, it would show that you could really just solely focus on that. And then I know I brought up on our show with the Limb that making that type of money, you could forge new bonds with people, but you could also sever some ties with people because, when you start out, you kind of got to work with who you got. And sometimes that's a good thing. Sometimes that's a bad thing. So that's just what I got right there. But let's move on into your book. Tell us about the Fox Chronicles.
Oh, let's see. Well, let's go over the pitch. It's a coming-of-age story about a young woman who finds out that she has powers and abilities, and she wants to use her powers and abilities to help her community and those around her. Unfortunately, there are outside forces that have bigger plans for her powers and abilities.
Okay. And you got a trailer. I'm going to pull that up real quick. Let's see here. I am not the fastest at navigating all this stuff here. Let's see. Where is it? All right. Let's see here.
In the near future, a teenager from Atlanta, Georgia, Autumn Fox, uses her newfound abilities and powers to combat human trafficking. The Fox Chronicles is a coming-of-age story about a young girl's fight to save the forgotten and find her place in this galaxy-spanning adventure. The story highlights a pressing issue of today and shows how one young woman seeks to use her power to create change. If you enjoy stories like Far Sector, Ironheart, Nubia, and Netflix's Voltron Legendary Defender, this series is for you. Please support and share this campaign so we can bring this story to readers like you. Thanks for your support.
That was a really good trailer, man. So who did the trailer for you?
You know what? You caught me off guard. I completely forgot the man's name. I can pull it up real quick. But the voice for that is Bob Carter.
Okay.
Which you guys might know from a bunch of video games like Mortal Kombat. And he's also voiced a lot of animes.
Okay.
Oh, okay.
That's cool. That's cool. The trailer actually the trailer looks really good. It looks very clean.
Yeah.
I like that style, man.
Yeah. Oh, it does. It looks really good. I really like that dude's voice. I was like, kind of got me there.
Well, like I said, he's a professional. That's what he does for a living.
Yeah. So the story
he gets to go around all over the world and stuff, and be guest at conventions.
Okay. Yeah, and as you said, the story is it something that kind of hits like close to home kind of thing? Is that something that is a big thing in Atlanta in terms of that y'all are dealing with over there?
Well, actually, it is. Okay, real quick rundown of the history of it. Me and Robert Jeffrey, who's my co-writer on the book.
Yeah.
All right. We did a project for the Center for Disease Control where we did a motion comic series that was dealing with HIV and AIDS awareness. All right. And so we produced like 8 animated episodes for the CDC. And while we were working with the CDC, we actually found out that one of the things that the CDC was tackling was child trafficking. And see, in my head, I always thought of, the CDC being about, viruses, bacterias, stuff like that. But they mentioned that, child trafficking is considered a pandemic. And so it was under their preview. And so I was like really hoping that we get a chance, through our connection with the CDC, work on something about child trafficking, because it is, something that it affects us, especially here in Atlanta. Basically, in Atlanta, we're the hub for everything.
Okay.
All right. Back in the day when Atlanta was terminus, it had all the railroads coming through it. All right. Now you've got 285, 85, 75, all of these interstates that all come through the city. And we've also got, of course, the most busiest airport in the entire country.
Okay.
So we are a hub for everything, good and bad. And unfortunately, child trafficking is one of those things.
Okay. Because we noticed that in both. We noticed that throughout the issue, like it's a heavy thing. So
yeah.
Because I know. Go ahead.
No, so as you said, it was very prominent in both issues that we read, but it was also kind of. It didn't feel as though it was just thrown in there as a plot point. It felt as though it was a serious matter. It felt it had some sort of weight to it. So that's what made me kind of ask the question.
All right. Well, one of the things and stuff that when we were working with the CDC, we were basically working off of a thing, basically edutainment, where you basically inform people about something, but you don't beat them over the head with it. It's incorporated into the story, so they learn without being preached to.
Right.
And that's how we did the project with them with the HIV and AIDS awareness. We actually had focus groups come in and would get all caught up into our story and couldn't wait for like the next chapter of the story. And we had one young lady that was like, Well, I thought we were here to learn and get information about HIV and AIDS awareness. And then we all kind of like looked at each other and started bumping fists, because apparently she got so caught up in the story, she was completely missing, good or bad, on her, okay, all the different points and educational stuff that we were putting into the story. Because they actually had the people take a test before they watched the animations, and then a test after they watched the animations. And you can see that most of the people were actually getting the education.
Okay. Yeah, I like what you said there, that you learn how to integrate it into the story instead of beating people over the head with it. And I can't tell you the number of stories we read where people, their messaging is just, dude, we get it. You don't have to continuously tell us this every other page. There are things you could show us naturally throughout the story. And, sometimes we wonder if people really understand how to do that. So I definitely appreciated that. And you did a good job at that. I also, in reading, I see a little bit of like Avatar influence in there, a little bit of Assassin's Creed influence in there. That's just my take. Alan, what did you notice?
Yeah, I was going to actually ask him, what are some of your influences for the greater narrative of the story, the science fiction part? What influenced you, or, what do you watch? What kind of, where do you take your science fiction ideas from? I know we all create our own stuff, but what are you influenced by?
Okay, well, I'm going to straight up say that none of this was influenced by any video games. Okay, I am not a video gamer. All right, and strange thing about it and stuff is that when I read, I like to read fantasy. All right, but when I'm watching TV, I enjoy science fiction.
Okay.
All right, and so some of my favorite science fiction shows are, of course, Star Trek, Battlestar Galactica, and all the versions of Lost in Space. Oh, of course, Babylon 5.
Okay. Well, I said that there was some Assassin's Creed influence because Adriana, there's that person that she sees. I can't remember his name right now off the top of my head, but it seems like that's passed through like a bloodline thing. And that is a little semblant of Assassin's Creed, where they use DNA memories and all that. So there are things and traits that are passed down through DNA. So that's where I got that from. But
Okay, I get that. Well, strangely enough, that part, okay, going back to when I was a kid back in the 70s, all right, I was playing around with character creation and stuff like that. And I was coming up with like my own little origins and stuff for people and stuff that would be like superheroes and stuff like that. So what I came up with was that, back in the distant past, you had a situation and stuff where they were like, aliens came to Earth and experimented, with people. And there were certain people that they set up as like, guardians, to protect the rest of mankind. And they bestowed them with powers. These people are ancient gods. All right. And then, of course, through time, certain people's powers and abilities of the bloodline fades away. But every once in a while, there's somebody who gets that kickback and it's bestowed with powers. So that's something I came up with, or used to think about when I was a kid, all the way back in the 70s.
Okay.
If I would create superheroes, how would I come up with their origins?
Okay.
That kind of reminds me of the Celestials in Marvel Comics and what they did, seeding life and altering DNA that eventually leads to the current mutant population. That's what that kind of reminds me of.
Yeah. So do you see this as a superhero book, or it felt more science fiction than a superhero book? Is it the intention? Is it science fiction or it's superhero?
It's science fiction.
Yeah. Right.
Yes, she has powers and abilities, but not everybody around has powers and abilities.
Right.
Okay.
And
And
what
then,
was the just one second? What was it? So what was the thinking, or what made the choice to make the protagonist a female?
Okay. All right. There's going to be another quick story then. Okay. What you're seeing right now, this is my character, Autumn Fox.
All right.
Okay. She is actually an alternate world version of another character that I created called the Amber Fox.
Hmm.
So where the Amber Fox is like Peter Parker,
Okay.
Autumn is my Miles Morales.
Okay.
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 Back when I was producing comic books, when I was editor in chief of Terminus Media, we actually had like all of these stories that took place in different, time periods and different realities. And
Mhm.
so I created the character of Amber Fox. She was like my combination of Doctor Who meets Laura Croft. And she was able to travel through all of these different realities and connect our stories together in one universe. Oh, there she is.
Yeah. Well, let me. She's too
So that's
small.
my
Oh.
Amber. And she, was the base character because I had pretty much gotten out of doing the whole indie comics thing because
Mhm.
I was like concentrating on the shop and also at that time had started doing my convention. But I had two artists that I had worked with, one here in Atlanta and one in the Philippines that used to work with us. And they both came to me the same week and said, "Hey, Tony, I'd like to work with you, on a project. Do you have anything that, we could work on?" And they were both talking about how they were big fans of Amber Fox.
Mhm.
And so what I thought about doing is like, I wasn't really sure about it, but then I started thinking about the CDC story and finding out about, the child trafficking. And I was like, let me create another version of Amber on a different reality to tackle this problem.
Okay.
And that's how we came up with Amber Fox. She was actually an idea, where she's like another dimensional version of Amber.
Okay.
Okay. And you included it as a backstory for the Fox Chronicles 1.
Yes.
Okay. I'm just scrolling through so everybody could kind of see because I was curious about that. I just thought it was like another story, just with the publishing company, because we see that happen too. It's like we'll add an 8-page backstory for another series just to get people interested. I didn't realize that it was actually connected.
Yeah. That's why, Fritz, who did the main story,
Mhm.
was one of the artists who hit me up. And Pauzan was the artist here in Atlanta who hit me up. So I let Powell do the Amber story
Mhm.
and Fritz did the Autumn story. So
Oh,
that
okay.
way, I was able to, to work with both of them.
Okay. And hence the name Fox Chronicles versus it being named after just one character.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. All right. Yeah, it makes more. I mean, the title worked just as it was, but now that I see this, it's 2 characters. Yeah, it works even better now. Okay. Um. Now I'm interested to know. Autumn Fox, right? That's who this one is. Her real name is Adriana. Any particular reason why her, to go with an interracial parentage, Black, Asian, just wanted to do it? Because a lot of times in indie community, they stress, Black family, Black characters and all that. And so I'm curious to know why you went that route.
Okay. All right. That's going to be like a philosophical thing and stuff on my part.
Mhm.
It's just like with my expo. Okay. Yeah, most of the people running the expo, but it's an expo for everybody. It's
Mhm.
not a situation where, it's just for one set of people. I like to have it everybody. When you come to my show, you'll look at the vendors and you'll look at the guests, okay, and you'll see that it's got more of a black emphasis to it. But that's just because the people and stuff that are a part of it, that are organizing it, and that are working on it. But we want everybody to come because, like I said, for my vendors, the primary color they're concerned about is green. All right. With a story like this, I'm actually using an international team. Okay. My team is made up of men, women, black, white, Asian, everybody. Okay. So I don't see a reason why I can't tell a story with someone that has a more mixed background. Because to me, it adds depth to the character. Okay. She's black. Yes. She's Asian. Yes. Okay. And that's something that adds to her character.
I mean, I don't personally have anything wrong with it. It's just, we see that, trust me, you'd be surprised some of the messages I get. I don't personally have an issue with it, because, and I asked this question in the group, like what makes a comic book black? Is it the characters? Is it the creators? Is it the publishing, company? Is it all three of those? Like how much of that criteria has to be met? And are we pigeonholing creators or black creators by holding them to that standard? Because in my opinion, you kind of limit yourself when you do that. It's great to make black leads, black characters and all of that, but there is a much bigger world and nobody puts those type of stipulations on other people. So that's why I'm asking these questions, because we see it all the time.
Like I said, I can get it and stuff. It's like there's some creators here in Atlanta that produced a book that was starring a black character. Okay, but the creative team that put it together was a white man, a white woman, and an Asian woman. Mm-hmm. And so a lot of people kind of like side-eyeing that, But I was just like, as long as they treat the character with respect, I don't really have a problem with it. But like I said, that's a question. It's like, is it a black book? The character's black, but nobody on the creative team is black. So like I said, I can see that's being a really good question.
Yeah.
Yeah, because I mean, if we're gonna hold them to that criteria, then how do we make Black Panther a black comic book? Because he damn sure wasn't created by black people. He was created by two Jewish guys, but we consider that a black book. And I can't tell you the amount of times, the amount of misinformation sometimes when it comes to Storm 1. Storm wasn't even created by black people. And then people say, oh, well, white people, they wanted to erase those African features, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, y'all do know Dave Cockrum intended for her to be a cat, right? So those African features that y'all like when she shows up in Giant Size X-Men, those are cat features. That's why she has white hair. And Chris Claremont, an English white dude, is the one that gave her a lot of that African backstory that y'all love so much, So it amazes me sometimes the things and the standards that we put into place and whatnot.
Oh yeah, and like I said, it's one of those things and stuff too is that we sit there, and even with the main companies, we think that the black characters should be done by black creative teams, and as a retailer, looking at my sale numbers, I can tell you that recently, Black Panther books written by black creators, except for the newer storyline, were not well received.
Okay.
All right. So having a black person working on the book isn't necessarily a plus for the book.
Okay. That's an interesting thing. Personally, my view is always the best person for the job. Let's go on who will do the best job. There is a case where people will say black character, black writers, they would like to see more. I get where they're coming from. They would like to see more opportunities for different people, males, females, whoever, to get these opportunities to write certain characters, and then they say, "Well, we're not given that chance." I personally think that's what the indie community is for, because there's nothing stopping you from creating what you want to create. You know what I mean? There's people say, "Well, you don't get a chance," but everyone, I would say, there's a pretty much a level playing field when it comes to indie creation. We all kind of start at that same place. We may have a different financial base, but we all have access to the same artists, colorists, writers. You know what I mean? So we kind of have a level playing field. And there's no one usually stopping you saying you cannot do something as an indie creator. You know what I mean? Most of the time, you're kind of free to do as you like.
That's one of the things, stuff, about the way I feel about things. And to me, looking back at some of the stuff I did with Terminus Media, I love to look at the fact that creators who started off and I published first, went on to work and do stuff for like Marvel and DC.
Okay.
To show you that it doesn't take a lot to go from your dream to working for the big guys, as long as, you've got the talent and you're putting stuff out there for them to see that you have the talent.
Yeah, that's Robert Kirkman's story. I mean, Battle Pope. I mean, he started publishing independently, and then, Image, and then, Marvel, and now millions of dollars and all that other fun stuff later, But he's also, that trajectory is also a bit of an outlier because he did have like The Walking Dead, and so he had some very unique properties there. Oh, there was I had a question, but it fucking leaves my mind right now.
How many issues do you plan for this first arc of Fox Chronicles?
We originally planned for 4 issues.
Okay.
All right. But my writer, Robert Jeffrey, as we're like, have replotted out the story and everything, we basically come to realization that it's going to take at least 6 issues to tell this story that we want to tell. Like I said, we don't want to. It's almost like that whole thing of like, a TV show that's streaming. It's like, how much room do you actually need to tell a story versus, all right, you've gone too far and people feel that there's fillers, or you had to like cram everything in and people didn't get a chance to breathe and really enjoy it.
Yeah, that's something that we as indie creators face. Pacing, and people don't understand that sometimes pacing is also tied to financial restraints. So it was very interesting to hear that you said you had it locked down for 4 issues, and then you're going to do it to 6. A lot of people, when you hear indie creators, a lot of them are talking about, yeah, I got this thing written for 35 issues, and all this kind of like, you know what I mean? Like, yeah, and I got 35 issues, and then I got a spin off that, and you're saying, yeah, you kind of got to focus on that first arc. You kind of got to focus on finishing. And I think that's something that I kind of learned a little later, where you need to finish a book. Having these open-ended books scattered all over, in the end, you don't feel any kind of accomplishment with that. You need to kind of wrap up something. You need to finish it. You need to be able to say, yeah, read my such and such run, and you have a whole story kind of thing. So you said it's going from 4 to 6. And
that's with us not doing 22-page stories.
Okay.
All right. We're doing like 30-page books.
30-page. Okay.
Yeah, 30-page stories.
And do you plot the whole thing? Do you plot the whole? What's your planning? How do you plan your arcs? Do you write? I know a few people who write from one book to the next, where they don't know what's going to happen 2 books down the line, or do you have this whole thing wrapped up and you know how it's going to end?
Oh yeah, we know how it's going to end.
Okay, cool.
But like I said, it's making sure that we give everything a chance to breathe and, do the storytelling. And I don't want to put, my artist in a bad situation where, he's having to like cram and, not really flush out, his artwork.
Yeah. I was telling Ron when we read the books, the book has a slower pace, and I was explaining to him like what I kind of noticed with your book, and where you do have those pages where you let the art breathe. There's pages without text on it. There's moments like that where so the book moves at a slower pace versus, as you said, books that cram a lot of stuff in where you have 9 panel pages and that kind of stuff. And at the same time, it doesn't do things. I've seen another set of books where pages are wasted. So there's the pages that if you took them out of the book, you would notice they're gone, kind of thing. So I would say that the pacing of the story is it's a slower paced book, but it's done well. It's not done poorly in terms
It doesn't
of
feel like a slow burn. Like
but it doesn't feel like a slog. It feels like it doesn't feel like a slog.
You
You
ever
do
watch
get a chance to know the characters and that kind of stuff.
you ever watch the movie Ad Astra with Brad Pitt?
No, I don't think I've seen that one.
Oh yeah, that movie is a bit of a slow burn, not a slog, but it's a slow burn. And it still goes somewhere, and that's kind of how we feel about your book. Like it's a slow burn, but I'm not like, God damn, have we left the bus station yet? Like, what the fuck is we doing, bro? Come on, like that last hour of work that somehow turns into 8 hours. You'd be like, shit, bro, come on.
Well, I will tell you and stuff, as you're reading through it. Like I said, you guys have read the second book.
Yeah.
Second book isn't out there in the public yet. It's finished, but we haven't put it out.
Yeah.
You guys, there's no character that's wasted. Every character that we see in the book that we're introducing you to is important to the story.
Okay.
Yeah, that's good.
That's good. That's good. Because, man, you like to Alan's point, when he talks about like wasted pages, man, we've read books where people they just waste. They add in this extraneous dialogue, and it's like, bruh, you're making this simple scene sound more like intelligent, philosophical than what it needs to be. Like, just shoot this dude already and get it over with, bruh. You trying to make like an Emmy award-winning speech, and it's like it don't fit, and you're using words incorrectly. Stop. Just stop, bro. Come on.
For me, two things. I actually had a chance and stuff. I think it was at a Heroes Con.
Mm-hmm.
All right. And an editor from Marvel had came by, and Joe Quesada was actually there at the convention. And we were like showing some of the books that we were doing with Terminus Media. And we showed our anthologies. All right. And so they came back and they got me, and they were like, Joe Quesada wants to see you. And I'm like, what? And then, so I follow him, and Joe Quesada is about to do a portfolio art review where he's going to look at people's portfolios and talk to them about what they need to do for their art and their storytelling and their pacing. And so they had me come in and sat me right down next to Joe Quesada. All right. Okay. And I got to sit there and watch him do all of these reviews on art. And he's sitting there and he's telling everybody about storytelling and pace and how to do the panels and everything else. All right. Also, somebody that helped me out was Brian Stelfreeze. All right. When we first started with Terminus Media, we started doing anthology stories. And he would basically sit down with all the writers, and he was like, you guys need to start off telling 8-page stories. Because if you can do 8-page stories and have a beginning, middle, and end, that you can write anything else. And so our beginning books and stories were all anthology stories. And, part of that and stuff was also working with Robert Jeffrey, because he was part of our group with Terminus Media. And he turned that, after we did the Route 3 comic. Have you guys read Route 3?
No, I've not read Route 3.
Oh, man, you got to read Route 3. I'm editor-in-chief on that, by the way. Okay, you got to read Route 3. All right. he turned that, and he got invited to what the DC workshop thing, where they bring in writers and everything.
Okay.
Oh, okay.
And he got to learn from the writers and editors at DC. So we were both able to take, his experience from that and my experience working with Brian Selfries and Joe Quesada and work on our book and our story.
Okay. That's brilliant, man.
That is a bridge. That's kind of like stand-up comedy. Like, you're not gonna start out with like an hour-long Netflix special. You're gonna start out 3, 5, 10, 15 minutes. And even then, like when you listen to comedians, they talk about like the stuff that you see and that recording in that special. That's all stuff that they work out when they're doing their shows, their clubs and whatnot. They take out the jokes that bomb and whatnot, because like that's how you building your set. That's how they build their set. That's how they.
Yeah. I noticed the add-on story was 8 pages because one of the things I kind of do when I read a lot of these books, I try to see if there's anything I can take away from them, if there's anything I can learn from them. One of the things I don't see a lot of people doing is mastering a short story. Where you said 8 pages, a lot of people can't do that. And I noticed the add-on story was 8 pages. I actually went back and counted it. I was like, this is an 8-page story. This is really good. And that is something that I think, there's 2 things that I think in the indie space we need to do more of, which is true one-shot books and end stories. There are too many books that the story ends when it ends. I've seen this is a personal peeve. I hate when books end on an odd number. On an odd number, where someone has a book and it's 27 pages or 25 pages, and because there's a rhythm and there's a rule, and that causes problems down the line. You may not be thinking of it now. When you got to put that into a trade, that's going to be a problem. You know what I mean? Or when you got to add it to something else, or if it gets picked. So these are little things that that I like to see. So the 8-page stories and 12-page stories, I would like to see some more of that kind of stuff. Even one shots which kind of end within 24, 28 pages. There are too many books that we read, and you got to read like 13 and 14 books, which they're all just dropping one a year. You know what I mean?
Well, that's the thing about yourself too. As a writer, you've got to learn within the page frame that you have to do setup, conflict, and resolution.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, you got your grand argument and your controlling idea. So as long as you have those 5 things, you should be in control of your story.
Right.
Again, setup, conflict, resolution, controlling idea, and grand argument. Grand argument is basically, what message do you want to get to your audience?
Okay.
All right. And your controlling idea is, how do you get it there?
Okay. Do you think? Yeah, that's. I also think they probably need to. Some of them, not all, but some need to have a better grasp of the 3-act structure. Also, the hero's journey would help. I've mentioned that before a couple of times, and people get mad at me, but it's like you read, and I'm like, you clearly don't understand these things, and so it's just like, okay, But sometimes you can't tell people stuff because. And I think this kind of goes into something you and Alan were talking about off camera. Like, people sometimes think they're at a level that they're not. And it's like, bro, we can see it in your work. So.
Yeah. Taking back to the book, who was responsible for the aesthetic of the book in terms of the style? I was telling Ron, I kind of really admired the futuristic feel of the book, where I could tell when you said it was 2065, it felt like 2065. Was that, is that all from the artist? Was that your input? How do you come about with that kind of stuff? Do you give them images? Do you say, well, like this movie, how do you all get to the aesthetic you want?
Well, like I said, I have to give credit to my artist. Fritz did an awesome job We talked to him about what we want the field to look like, and he was able to take that. That's why I'm like trying to hurry up and get these books out, because I know for a fact, he's going to get scooped up soon. I need to go ahead and stuff before he starts getting that, that Marvel and DC money and get this story cranked out. And you don't have enough time for me.
Yeah.
It's just like, we want to go ahead and stuff. I know that Robert wants to go ahead and get the next stories out for like Route 3. But like I said, the artist is, busy doing stuff for the big boys, and he's out there now doing stories for like every other indie.
Yeah.
Yeah,
that's something as an indie creator that you do face when you discover someone, you're not
coached.
you're in that tricky situation where it's like, I want to see them succeed, but I also want to see my work get done.
Like I said, Sean Damian Hill, I can always say, hey, I was the first one to print them. Mm-hmm. I was the one that, got him there. And everybody else is like, yeah, we got him now, though.
Yeah.
But that's how we did it, though. It's like when we were doing stuff for Terminus, we always considered it like, okay, we're going to be AAA baseball. You're going to work on your skills with us, AAA. And then, your next step is to go ahead and do stuff for the big boys. Unfortunately, the way things usually work, though, that always usually works more for the artist than it does for the writer.
Yeah, the writers don't tend to. Yeah, it doesn't really tend to work for the writers. I was telling someone it is a lot of pressure for a creator to be a writer-creator in the indie game versus being a artist creator. You're more likely to succeed as an artist creator because artwork is the driving force behind a comic book. There's not. Yes, people talk about a good story, but artwork is the driving force. It's a visual media, and that is the truth. When you are a creator, you have to pay a lot of people. You got to pay every single person who is a part of that crew. Everybody else seems to kind of, get a piece of the cake before you do.
I mean, that's part of it. Like I said, I could be honest with everybody. It's like, my book costs thousands of dollars to make. But, to me as a creator and also somebody who's a retailer, like I said, I'm a retailer. I have my own focus group. All right. My comic customers let me know what kind of stuff they like and dislike about a wide range of comic books.
Okay.
So to me, I can't put out anything that my own customers wouldn't want to pick up. If I'm putting it out there on the shelf or they pick it up and read it, I want them to feel that it's just as good as anything they pick up from Marvel or DC or Image, if not better. Because sometimes I pick up some books from myself from like Marvel and DC, and I look at it and, I'm a writer, but even I'm like, whoa, where do they find this artist? This is an artist I wouldn't even work on my stuff, So I don't think it's hard for indie creators to produce something of quality just like anybody else. Like I said, when I first started toying around with like trying to create comics, and I think my first comic story was produced in a program book for the Atlanta Fantasy Fair, I think in like 1986, 1987. All right, we didn't have all this computer technology. There wasn't all this Photoshop and scan it in and digital inking and, digital lettering. It's like, it wasn't there. But now you can create a comic book of quality with just your desktop or your laptop, So there's no reason not to put anything out there because the big companies don't have an advantage over anything now, except, they got more money to pay somebody, but that's it. There is no big, resource difference.
So if you said, when you say that, would you say then that we should be able to judge indie and say the big two books on the same scale, on the same level? Because
interesting.
Think about it. Even with the big boys, I'm sure you've read plenty of stuff from the mainstream comics, and you're like, the editor didn't do his job.
Yeah.
Okay, plenty of times. You're like, what is the editor getting paid for? I could have done a much better job on this. I would have caught this, you know? So you have those same abilities.
This reminds me, because this kind of hits a little closer to home with me, because I remember I made a post in BCL about this. Just if you guys say that you're suitable alternatives to Marvel and DC, you know, why are we not holding you to that same standard? And people got mad at me. But, you know, as somebody who's bought comics for over 20 years, like if you're going to say you at this level, you can't just expect the praise. You got to take everything that comes with it. And one of the things that I took away from that, and I don't remember who said it, but somebody said that the tools needed are not hidden behind paywalls. So what you said, Tony, just reminded me of that. Like those tools are not hidden behind paywalls. That's why in one interview, you know, I showed this book. This book has writers and editors in it. I've got other books up here. Oh, you know, these things are all things you can buy on Amazon. Things that it's like you said, there's no real excuse. Marvel and DC don't have that advantage. The tools are out there for you. You like manga style art. Here's a manga book on composition, you know, and these are all things that you can buy. And a lot of people, well, we don't have the money for good editors and whatnot. You can go look up the tools to be an editor. Those books are out there. You can go get a writer's resource. Those things are all out there. So you're right. There really is no excuse.
Well, like I said, the main excuse is access to the capital. Like I said, right now and stuff, if I had the capital, I could put out the Fox Chronicles every other month. No problem whatsoever. You know, my artist and my writer would love that. Okay. But it's the problem of having the capital to do it. Yeah. And part of the thing is like, okay, you can, you know, most of us, like I said, to get chunks of money or basically what I call pre-sales, we have to do stuff like Kickstarters, you know, because that's the only way to get our books out there. We could do shows, but doing a show is so much more work than doing a Kickstarter. I can do a Kickstarter and move 400 books pre-sold. Digital copies, you know, digital copies are like, that's like just money. Okay, that goes straight to the artist. You know, here, I don't have to use it for printing, shipping, anything. All right, that's gravy for the artist. You know, he can get that money right away. All right, but for anything else, you've got to have that constant turnover of money. You know, and like I said, you know, I'm, you know, more in tune with it because that's how my comic business works. Okay, you know, comics come in every month. I need them to go out every month, or I don't have the money to order the next comics. Or I'm gonna like, okay, these comics are due, but the other comics didn't sell, so now I got to take some money from over here with Magic the Gathering and shift it over to help buy some comics, and then hope the comics catch up and sell later. You know, it's all about, you know, the supply and the demand. If you've got demand for your product, then you can keep cranking it out at a high level. So to me, that's the main thing that's holding back indie creators. It isn't the tools to create the comics.
Cash flow.
It's the money to put the comics out there and spread your fandom enough so that you can move the books. Because like I said, you can sell 100 or some on Amazon or, you know, through Kickstarter, but you need to sell many thousands of copies of a book to keep everybody employed and working on your book.
Yeah.
So it's not really a matter of story quality. It's production and distribution. That's where you really got the excuse. But when it comes to story quality, basically there really is no excuse because those tools are out there and available to learn the hero's journey, the 3-act structure, composition, things of that nature. Those tools are out there. You can get those books anywhere. You can get that knowledge anywhere.
Well, you were showing books, but I'm like, there's that thing out there called YouTube University.
Yeah.
You know, there's basically nothing that you almost need to learn that you can't go get off of YouTube.
Yeah.
Who was it that wrote
a lot of my writing when I started to get into comic book writing from YouTube in terms of story structure, character development, that kind of stuff. BookTube is a great resource for that kind of stuff because story, even if you watch, there's a few channels that did stuff about screenplays, and they interview directors, and that is again another great resource where you take that and you kind of just weave it into your field, that kind of thing.
Yeah, like I said, it's all out there. And then most of the common stuff too. If you go and do conventions, go up to your creators, pick their brains. They'll give you information for free. A lot of people you can go up to is like, hey, back in the day, Peter David, hey, you got a copy of such and such and such script? He's like, sure, $5. Thank you, sir. Can you sign it for me? And you've got a professional comic book script right there that you get to dissect.
Jim Shooter was that way. Like Jim Shooter signed stuff for free. He just loved to talk. I don't know if you ever got to meet him, but he loved to talk. He loved to talk about the industry. Not like Jim Strinkle. Jim Strinkle loves to talk, but that's more performative. I don't know if you've ever been around him, but Jim Shooter, you come up to him, he loved the interaction. He wanted to talk the hobby, the fandom, and the business of comics, man. He really loved it. Rest in peace, Jim Shooter and everything.
Oh, yeah.
Well, gentlemen, we are about 50 minutes in. It's been a good interview so far. We're going to go ahead and wrap it up because we know it's getting late where you guys are. Any closing remarks, guys?
I just got one closing question for Tony. So, in terms, do you sell indie comic books? Do you sell indie books in your store?
Dude, I've got a whole indie comic section. All right. Next time I come on the show, y'all got to do your research. All right. Go to my Facebook, go to my Instagram, look at the pictures. I take pictures of everything. And there's videos of indie creators coming into my store and going over to the indie section, and they're talking about their books as they place them on the shelf.
Oh, that's great.
Okay. All right. You can ask. There've been like tons of interviews and stuff of like Marcus Williams and Greg Burnham, and they will tell you that I have sold, except for them, I have sold more copies of Tuskegee Heirs than any shop in the entire country.
I think since you brought that up, if that the location you were at around 2022, I think you were the only shop that I saw Tuskegee Heirs in. And I had went to
even back then I had an indie section. As a matter of fact, what I did is that have you guys seen Cobra Kai? You watch Cobra Kai?
Yeah.
I don't watch Cobra Kai.
Yeah.
I see it. I've seen it.
Show, man. You should check it out. All right. Cobra Kai season 2. Remember there's this fight that starts off in a comic shop?
Yeah.
Okay, that's my shop.
Okay.
Okay, and guess who got to set up the set area for that? I did. So when you look right before the fight starts, there's this row of comic books. They're all indie comic books. They're all black indie comic books. And basically, I got all of the creators to sign off so that it was okay for their books to be in the scene.
Yeah, that's great. Huh?
All right, so like I'm all about promoting indie creators, but I got all those guys to sign up. And so when you watch Cobra Kai season 2, you'll see everybody's indie books right there in the scene right before the fight starts.
Yeah, that's cool.
Okay, that's dope. That's dope.
Oh, well.
I only have one other.
I'll walk it back and watch the scene.
I definitely will.
Season 2, episode 6.
I definitely will. I'll go back and check it out.
Comics.
Okay, I might have to just pull it up just to watch it because I'm not a big Karate Kid Cobra Kai guy, but I might pull it up just for that.
Okay.
One last thing for me, because we didn't mention it, and this is something me and Alan talked about. We did like the use of dialogue. Like, how can we put it? It's much easier to be in the future and use dialogue from the past than to be in the past and kind of use dialogue that hints at the future. And we've read books like that where it's like, yeah, your book's set at this point in time in the 1800s, and there's no way, given the circumstances, they would do or say these types of things. It's much easier for your book because it's 2065 to use verbiage and dialogue that feels like Atlanta right now. That just made more sense. So I did want to pull that out. But other than that, that's my closing remark.
All right, so did y'all like the books?
Yeah, I like the book. I to tell the books. I think the books were solid. I like the book. There's nothing about the book that I would say, as I said, everything I kind of told you here is like pacing is cool. I love the art. I love the art style, the dialogue, the story, the protagonist. There wasn't anything confusing. It was straight up a good book.
No, I mean, it's like you said, there's no characters wasted. And then you keep with your central theme, human trafficking.
There is something which isn't a problem, which I kind of assume as a story creator, you leave certain things that you need to kind of figure out what is going on. So you have that. You constantly have us asking questions. So we don't know. So all the answers would be basically for me. I have to kind of read the third book.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Yeah.
That's basically.
We've actually got pages and stuff for the third book that have already been drawn. But I'm gonna give you a little inside hint. It's basically in the third book. It's when she goes into her Batman mode.
Okay.
So we'll see more of like
her Batman detective mode.
Okay.
Oh, okay. Yeah. My only thing is like
people gonna get hurt.
Huh?
Yeah, people gonna get hurt.
Yeah.
Okay.
I noticed that technically you kind of teased us with some of the action because a lot of it was kind of not real. It was kind of VR kind of stuff, which I kind of noticed. Yeah.
Oh yeah. So I'll be looking forward to that. And then, just the kind of like what Alan along that lines is like, okay, you've teased this impending, battle, which I'm assuming is the overarching narrative. No big issue there because that's something you've got 6 issues planned out and you focus on that. We'll see that over time. Yeah. So I have no real issue there either. So yeah, I enjoyed it, man. I look forward to the next one. And thank you for giving us
your wad in the very beginning,
Huh?
I said you can't blow your whole wad in the very beginning.
No, you can't. No.
I mean, you can. Is it a good thing? No.
No. And strangely enough, completely off subject, but that's one of my main problems with the very first Blade movie. And I don't have many problems with it. I love that movie. But that nightclub scene was so awesome that I was hoping there was going to be something even more awesome at the end.
Yeah,
and it didn't happen.
It didn't happen. Yeah, that happens sometimes. Yeah, that happens a lot in those movies in that time period. It either did 2 things. You either didn't live up to the expectations of the last battle, or you had a boring movie, and in the last 15 minutes of the whole movie was good. That was how it was back in the day.
I do have one question, and it's something I just thought of because I was thinking about that first book. Are we going to learn more of why? And it is Autumn Fox is her vigilante persona. Adriana is her real name, right? Just want to make sure I get that correct.
No, it's not.
Oh shit! I done fucked up. I could have sworn they called her Adriana. My bad, bro. But I do want to know: are we going to learn more of why her parents kind of shunned out that dude's voice, his image, and all that other stuff?
Oh yeah. I mean, all right. Don't want to give away too much for people who haven't read the book,
right?
But technically, her and John, for all practical purposes, are twins.
Oh.
They were both born at the same time. John has always been there with her. They grew up together. He activated with her birth, or actually with her conception.
Okay. That actually makes sense because you do allude to something that does hint to that, where they spoke about her saying like when she started to see him and stuff like that, and so it does make sense when you say it like that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because I interpreted like the parents could see it also. Okay, that does make more sense.
Now, the parents are close. The parents were the key, and she would have never existed without the parents. But you see that it started on 2 different continents.
Yeah.
And we had to wait through time for the parts to come together.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Well, that was my only other question, man. Other than that, it's been fun. And with that, guys, we're gonna go ahead and wrap this up, man. Thank you for coming on, Tony.
No
Appreciate
problem.
it having you on, bro. It's been fun.
All right.
Stick around for a little bit, brother. Peace, everybody.